Hi, my name is Jim Jones. I'm a senior cloud architect here at Offsite Data Sync. And today we're going to talk about getting the most out of your Veeam backups and activating that data with Veeam DataLabs and Offsite Data Sync's newest feature, Auto Recover. I'm joined today by Michael Cade. Michael, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Jim. Yeah, so I'm Michael Cade. I'm a senior technologist at Veeam, and I sit within the product strategy group. And a lot of people say, well, what does that actually mean? So I get to work a lot with our partners, VCSPs, alliance partners, our product management internally, our product marketing, basically every single facet internally and externally that we interact with. So the most important part of our role is around feedback. So understanding what you guys as potential Veeam customers, what ODS are doing from a VCSP point of view, feeding that back into our product wheelhouse, if you like, to then make our product better, make it more suitable for you guys. And that's why you hopefully see a lot of those gaps being filled over time with what we're doing with our portfolio.
All right, so we're getting a report that people are not hearing audio. We hearing this from everybody? Oh, let's see, a couple people saying that they're hearing the audio. So Travis will need to get you going right then. All right, yeah, I mean, Michael, that sounds like a lot of hats, and I will say myself, I've used you as a path for giving some feedback back myself. So by all means, everybody reach out to Michael and the rest of the product strategy team for that kind of stuff. So let's take a quick rundown through the agenda today. So Michael's going to start by talking about Veeam DataLabs and giving a technical walkthrough of it. Then I'm going to talk about Offsite Data Sync's Auto Recover and show you a demo. And then we'll go from there. So Michael, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, so traditionally any Veeam webinar session, breakout session, if we were actually allowed to be somewhere in person, would generally be focused around two things, and that would generally be around backup and recovery, right? It's kind of our table stakes, if you will, of what we should be delivering. I'm not sure how these slides are going to work, but today I actually want to talk about more of how do we put that data to work? How do we activate that data? How do we do something with that backup data? Instead of, I think traditionally we've made our backups because we've always had to, as maybe an insurance policy type action within our businesses, and it sits on disk, maybe goes to tape, and we never want to touch it again. Well, only if we ever have to recover from it. But actually, you think about what that data is. That's a complete copy of your production workload from maybe the day before, maybe even an hour before. So, and it's sitting on what probably cost you some money to store that data in some sort of storage. So what we want to talk about is actually leveraging that data to do something with it. And there's lots of different use cases. I'm sure everyone on the call can think of a use case for that. And we're going to get into some of those use cases. But also we're going to touch on why and how to do that from a Veeam point of view. Because there'll be a lot of people on the call that are Veeam customers today, and you look after your Veeam backup and replication environment on a daily basis, and you might have a wonderful time from a backup and recovery point of view, hopefully more backup and less recovery, but you know that if you did need to, the recovery options are absolutely there. Backup and recovery from this point of view, we believe is a bit of a table stake. Yeah, we can absolutely make things faster, we can make things more efficient, all of the good things when it comes to backing up faster, more policy driven, using things like vSphere tags and more automation around how do we deploy this and how do we do things like that. But ultimately, if we think about backup and recovery, that's really the table stakes. It's not unique. There's a lot of vendors out there. We're not going to name any, but there's a lot of vendors out there in this space that offer the ability to back up and recover the data. What we see and what we're going to talk about today is more of a differentiator and how and what we do from a data reuse, or more traditionally known as things like copy data management. So first of all, you've probably seen, well, you've definitely seen, anyone that's on this chat, unless this is your first ever webinar, which if it is, then brilliant. But welcome. You've probably seen, go on, Jim, what was...
Go ahead.
So yeah, you've probably seen something around the growth of data being so exponential. Data is the new oil, I think, is a good one that I heard, but I'll never use. But I like this one. A virtual gold mine of data is sitting idle in your backups. And this is what we want to get into, is how do we do something with that data? How do we put that data to work? So data has a better idea. And again, all of us hopefully are in some sort of IT position, some sort of technical decision maker, technical engineer, systems engineer, etc. And we know what our world, what our days look like. Whenever I go into an office or whenever I go into work, each day is a different day because tech is always changing. I have to understand as a technologist what is not just in the backup world, but what's the future of storage, what's the future of compute and cloud compute, all of that. We know we signed up for this. That's why we're in IT. We like the fact that the world is full of change from a data point of view, but also from a technology point of view. And we also know, and we've definitely heard, well, how critical data is. We know that. So this is really what we want to touch on is, well, I don't really want to be testing out. Let's simplify it down into, I don't really want to be testing my Windows updates on my production SQL box. I want to be able to do that in an isolated environment away from the production, because if that production does go down because it's that critical to the business, then we start losing money. And in IT, we don't generally get involved with that money side of things unless we're asking for some to do something. But what we definitely don't want is the people above or the decision makers, business-wise, financial-wise, coming down on us and blaming us for IT outages and things like that. And I think over the last, definitely over the last few years, we've seen an increase in people having to work with IT teams and functions and the software that we've got and the infrastructure environments that we have available to us to make sure how critical that data is and how available that data is. So what we want to talk about is Veeam DataLabs as a broad agenda for my section before we go back to Jim. And really, a couple of years ago, we rebranded a subset of features into something called Veeam DataLabs. So Veeam DataLabs isn't actually a feature. You'll never find Veeam DataLabs in Veeam Backup and Replication or Veeam One or any of the platform. That's a massive bugbear of Jim's. And we've put that feature in as well. But what you will find is the other feature sets that we're going to talk about and kind of walk through where you potentially will use it. But I also know the Veeam community come up with some crazy ideas on how to use Veeam technologies to better their world, their IT environment, their systems. So the first one we're going to talk about, is the SureBackup piece. And this is a way of being able to take those backups and validate that those backups, but also replicas, are in a good state. So not just a CRC health check on the backup file itself to make sure that blocks are good and healthy. This is actually going to take the backed up files, the backed up machines that you've taken within your virtualization environment, and it's going to spin that up in an isolated environment and run a test against those. But we'll touch on that next. And this is fully automated, and the same goes for on-demand Sandbox. So on-demand Sandbox uses that same technology, that same SureBackup function, but now gives you the ability to offer that out to another business unit or a developer or security to be able to actually use that data. It's not just automatically spun up, spun down, thrown away. Then we've got a couple more related to the recovery side of things. So the first one being stage restore. This is about injecting a process. Again, we'll get onto that. Secure restore is more topical than ever at the moment, is around ransomware. But also just think viruses in general, right? We're living in this pandemic world. We never want to recover a malicious threat that is inside our backups back into production, if we can help it. Like if we know about it, if our antivirus software knows about it, let's make sure it's not going to impact our production. So we'll get into those four. And there is one more that came out at the beginning of this year called the Data Integration API. And we're going to touch on that as well. And that's really about exposing our data format for third-party integrations to do more with that data again. So that whole premise of what we're going to talk about is, well, how can we do more with that data? How can we, like, we've got the backup, we've got the recovery, we've got that down to a T. Now let's concentrate on how we do something with that data. So some of the use cases, I've kind of touched on these already, so I'll quickly go through, but what do we mean by leveraging that existing data and doing it proactively by using the investment that you've already made from a backup storage point of view? So things like operational efficiency. So Windows Update is exactly that. Or application updates, or just a schema update within SQL, or some sort of operational awareness without having to do it in production live environments that are potentially running your business. Now, how do we leverage the data to actually provide a better business outcome? That sounds very cheesy in marketing, but think about the process that you take. Just because you do it that way, and you might have done it that way for 5-10 years and it works well, but the whole point of innovation is, well, how do we streamline that process? How do we make it better? How do we make it faster? Doing that in an isolated environment gives you such a freedom to be able to test things, see if it works. If it breaks, throw it away. We're not going to change any of the backup data. The backup data is, by all accounts, immutable from any change. It's in a read-only state. Any changes that you put to it will go to a cache disk, without getting into the tech behind that. But then think about not so much ransomware, but think about pen testing, security pen testing. I don't really want my security team going hard on my production environment and making changes and understanding where the loopholes are, where the vulnerabilities are. Let's put them into an isolated environment and let them run wild in there, because if they break that, we don't lose any money as a business. And then on top of that, sorry, Jim.
Yeah, if I can just interject for just 1 minute. So
Sure.
I'm hoping you guys, so for those of you guys that maybe don't know me, so I work for Offsite Data Sync now, but I was a SMB admin for a very long time. And if you've, as Michael knows, and if you've heard me on any podcasts or anything, I am a big lover of DataLabs and the SureBackup capability. So as Michael's talking about this stuff, I'm hoping that like the juices are starting to flow in your brain and you're starting to think of some ways that you can really think outside of the box, because this capability within Veeam has empowered me as an admin and given me such a capability to move forward on a lot of things that are typically very hard to do. And it's just, yeah, it's like literally the greatest secret in Veeam. So yeah, I'll hand back, but.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And you're absolutely right, is that this is one of many features and functionality that we have within Veeam Backup and Replication that we probably don't talk about or shout about enough, along with things like replication as well. We always talk about the backup and recovery because that's number one, and that's what people need and want, as that insurance policy, but they don't necessarily think they need or know they need something around data reuse or even replication for that matter. So then the final one here is around, well, how do we then expose that data to do some analytics? Again, analytics is quite a heavy workload. You probably don't want that impacting any performance on your production. So let's do it on a remote site using SureReplica or using the technology that we have from a replication point of view. And then also being able to ensure compliance. You never want to be the company that is storing data against regulation. Now, as you can probably tell, I'm based in the UK, so I've lived through this whole GDPR couple of years of understanding what GDPR means to us IT people and understanding what types of data we should be keeping. That's exactly the same for you guys in the US. This isn't GDPR changed. We just refreshed some of the laws, really. But you guys have the same regulations with SOX and other ISOs out there. So, but what this gives us the ability to do is, well, okay, the auditors are coming in. Here's a sandbox. Go and play with that data, because we don't want you as an auditor to slow down our business any more than you already have. I want you to use this subset of data that we farmed it yesterday, or we farmed it first thing this morning. use this and you'll get all of the information that you need, and then give us the feedback.
Mhm.
So, and this goes to the point of what Jim was saying. So officially, what is leveraging data, or what is Veeam DataLabs? And it's the ability to take your backups, take your replicas, but also some of your storage snapshots where we integrate with that storage vendor to either mitigate risk, reduce costs, improve service, improve operations. But actually, as Jim said, and I'm not quoting him here, but the coolest thing you've never heard, plus this is my feature within Veeam Backup Replication that I get to talk about all the time, is the coolest thing you've ever heard or you've never heard of from Veeam. And it can do some incredible things. And I'm sure everyone on the call will have a thought before the end of the hour as to what it is you could do with this technology when we get to what it actually is. So, and this isn't new. This is by no means a new feature or functionality that's come. We've been doing this for years. I'm pretty sure version 5, and this was before my time at Veeam, is around, we're talking about like maybe 8 years ago, 2012 is a good guess on that. And that's when we started doing things like that SureBackup and the ability to start leveraging that data from a backup file. Then a few years later, we looked at the replication engine and how can we leverage the replication engine to run those automated tests against replicas. So now think about, okay, an automated way of being able to test whether your replicas or your replicas that live in your disaster recovery site actually spin up and actually turn on and work without having to bring down anything in production. I know where I was before Veeam, and that was a burden, a massive burden for me.
Mhm.
And then going one step further is, well, how can we leverage the storage snapshots? How could we take those production performance snapshots and very efficient snapshots and be able to then get like-for-like performance based on those? And again, that came in that same version 8 release, probably around, I want to say 5 years ago now. And then even more recently, so this will be 20, I want to say the back end of 2018 was the secure and stage restore. And the one that you don't see on here is the start of this year, which was that data integration API. So although it's a quiet product and or quiet feature and we don't talk about it, there's still innovation happening. There's still stuff going on from a Veeam product management point of view and R&D. Okay, so let's actually get into what are those features. So first one we want to touch on is the SureBackup job. So SureBackup job is really the verification of your backup. You could also call this SureReplica if we're going to use replicas, but SureBackup job is the easiest way to explain what this looks like. So if we take an image here, so over on the left-hand side, you have your production storage, you have your hypervisor. On the right-hand side, you have your compressed, deduped Veeam backup file living on some storage that you've invested money in. So the concept of this is being able to take that compressed, deduped backup file using our patented technology that we also use for instant VM recovery and other such tools like FLR and things like that. We use vPower NFS to present that backup file directly into your hypervisor as a data store, and then we see the virtual machines and we can spin those up in this virtual lab, this isolated network within your environment. Now, the key point here is this makes it look like everything is on your production vSphere environment or your production Hyper-V environment. That doesn't, we don't care. That can go to any vSphere or any Hyper-V environment. And without spoiling what Jim's going to talk about later, it can really go to any location. So we spin them up, but then what we do, and remember this is completely scheduled and automated, we're going to test against the VM, the app, and the OS, and then we're going to send you a report. That I've got one on the next slide to show you what that looks like. But this is fully automated. This can run at 1 a.m. in the morning, and yeah, you don't have to worry about this. You set it up, you forget about it, and it just works. It just happens. And then the report gives you that. In fact, before we go to the demo, the report gives you the information that is what is it tested against. If it's an application group, and in fact, Jim, you've used this probably way more than me. What's your experience from a typical application group that you'd see in there?
Yeah, it's great. So yeah, so SureBackup way back in V5 was actually what sold me and my previous organization on using Veeam at all. And you know, the thing that I find that a lot of people have to wrap their brain around is SureBackup is completely automated. You have baked in scripts, and then you can build your own scripts to test your application. So let's say you've got a web server that's answering on 8080. You can modify or create your own scripts and say, okay, go see if it's listening on 8080, and then we consider it good. I'll add to it. So one of Michael's coworkers, Luca Deloca, has a wonderful script. If you just Google Luca 1000 VMs, that he's written a script that'll let you go through and you can work through an entire enterprise's worth of backups in a given month and automate the testing of all of those over the course of a month. Spins up the virtual machine, shuts it back down, and emails you a report on the back end. It's really, really slick.
Yeah, exactly that. So let's jump into the demo, and hopefully I can control this. So this is a Veeam backup replication interface if you haven't seen it before, and we're running this SureBackup job. Now, as I said, this would normally be automated and you wouldn't generally see this. This would happen in your like downtime when you're hopefully sleeping at home. So what we've done is there's an automated creation of a resource pool, and then we throw in our virtual appliance, and without getting into the technical components that we have, this is going to give us the access, and Jim's got a good diagram later on that explains how this looks. This gives us access from production into that isolated environment, but nothing from the isolated environment back out into production, because that would be bad if we started bringing up domain controllers and dependencies in there alongside your production. So then what you're going to see is that vPower NFS, where we've exported that backup file as a data store. And then we're going to start to see here that virtual machine spinning up. So it's a CentOS, it's actually a web server. Again, this is going to be fully automated. I'm just showing you how it looks if we were to be running this as a sandbox environment. So we're going to publish it, we're going to reconfigure it so it's in our isolated environment, we're going to power it on, and then we're going to wait for that application. So I've defined this as a web server, and then I'm going to understand what that web server looks like, or if it's working, if HTTP is open, etc. All of the scripts that we do. And then you saw how quick so it spun it up. It understood that the application or the operating system came on, the application was initialized, we run the test scripts, and then we powered off the machine. We removed the mount point as a data store, and then we got this report to say everything was a success. It was a web server that we tested against this, and everything was good. Now, obviously, there's much more complicated or more in-depth tests you can run, but for a 1.5, 2-minute demo, that was a pretty good, solid, automated way of being able to show what the power of SureBackup there. So, and this is just a copy of that report again that you saw at the end of that. So then moving on, how do we take that one step further? So we've showed you how we automate the verification of your backups, but then how do we actually expose that out to other teams or other groups within your IT department to be able to do something with that data, actually be able to leverage that data? This will look pretty similar, is that we're going to take that backup file, we're going to present that through vPower NFS. You'll notice that this painting has definitely been used quite a lot from a Veeam point of view. We're going to expose that into our virtual lab, into that isolated environment. But this time, we're not going to automate the shutdown. We're going to leave it up and then enable that manual verification or that manual input to dive in through that virtual lab proxy appliance into the data lab, into the virtual lab, to be able to use that group of machines, that group of application servers that you wish them to work against. And this is where you can think of any use case there, whether it's security pen testing, whether it's patch updates, running it on patch Tuesday before you roll it out on patch Wednesday, if that's even a thing anymore. I know Windows are still updating everything in my house. Taking that one step further, I mentioned around storage snapshots, being able to do that from a fast production storage system that is also holding your systems, also holding your production workloads and being able to do it there. Think about SQL DBAs. We can absolutely run that from a backup repository, but you're probably going to be running your backup repository is going to be slower, spinning disk, higher capacity. You probably haven't invested, and you don't really need to. Still today, you don't need to invest in Flash for your backup.
Yeah.
But if a SQL DBA needs performance because he's performance testing against your production database, then let's do it against the storage snapshot. And the best thing here is, well, we can mix and match. So, okay, from a SQL point of view, or let's say a 3-tier app. Let's say we need, and I know this is Jim's example, but I'm going to use it for another example. Let's say a 3-tier app. We've got our domain controller, we've got our database, and we've got a web server front end. The web server front end is probably not required to be so performant. The domain controller doesn't need to be performant. Let's run that from the backup file, but then let's choose the storage snapshot to run our SQL box or our Oracle box from. We can push them all into that same virtual lab from wherever they need to come from, and they'll all be able to talk to each other, or they can all be from the storage snapshot, or all from the backup. Then going one step further is where you could do that from a replica as well. So being able to actually make use of that disaster recovery site and actually put that data to work over in that other location, so you're really not impacting any performance on the production. Jim, did you want to add anything to on-demand Sandbox?
Yeah, man. So a couple things. So one thing I'd like to point out, you'll notice that Michael keeps talking about domain controllers. If I can give you any one single tip as you get started with SureBackup and DataLabs, pretty much if you're a Windows shop, always have a domain controller in your application groups and always have it be the first VM in the group, because that will make your life infinitely better. You won't run into authentication issues and stuff like that. But you know, from my own experience, on-demand Sandbox is where you can really get excited. So I used it for a few things. Our organization had a large auditing requirement. So that manual verification that Michael was showing right there, we actually had someone RDP into virtual machines in the lab and run reports to check against what was run the night before. Then from an admin perspective, I used to love to use this when VMware would release, you know, the early versions of the VCSA appliances, create a little application group with a domain controller and the VCSA, and you could test those VCSA upgrades without actually hitting production and make sure they weren't going to blow up. Because some applications are going to be a little crazy when they go the first time through.
Yeah, I think Jim makes a really good point there in regards to, so that application group, which is what you see in that rectangle in the middle, is if you think about your application, your SQL server, your web server, whoever's doing the work, it might be a web developer trying out a new theme for your website. If you can run that web server on its own, great. If there's no dependencies to that, great. You just need that web server in that application group. If that web server needs some sort of authentication, then you need your LDAP server, your domain controller. And if it's running a SQL backend and the developer needs that because he needs to test about what transport looks like after he's done that theme upgrade, then you'll need that in there as well. And that's another copy. The other thing that I'll mention around both SureBackup and SureReplica and on-demand Sandbox is that, okay, so we've got the storage. You're already storing the backup data, or you're already taking the storage snapshot. So there's that requirement anyway to be able to store that data somewhere. But to be able to run these machines, you need to have the additional CPU and memory to be able to run that. Now, we can give you the option to tone down what the memory looks like or what the footprint of those resources look like. And we can tone them up as well. So if you want to see indeed what the performance looks like, if you were going to add an extra 16 gig to the machine, absolutely, we can help there. But on the host that you're pushing that to, in this instance, vSphere, on your ESXi host, you're going to need that additional CPU headroom and additional RAM. That's one thing to mention. It's pretty magic, but it's not It's not
Yeah.
it's not that magic. Okay, so to get on to the third point. So stage restore. If you think about, so when we talk about on-demand sandbox and we talk about that from an operations point of view, there is no way, and we might run Windows Update and we update all of our servers and everything runs absolutely fine. And we've documented that change. And now you're happy that this won't break our mission critical systems. You then have to take that script into your production and make that happen. What stage restore is built for is being able to inject a process into your restore scenario. Now, from a marketing point of view, it's more about how do we remove some data as part of that recovery. So let's take the SQL database or Oracle database, for example, that contains, let's say it's a marketing company and someone as a customer, patron of the marketing company has their data residing in that Oracle database, that now that person has come along and said, I want that right. I'm declaring that I want that right to be forgotten, using GDPR as an example. Okay, so that's very easy to do in a way from your production system. You run a script and it removes every single line item that is appropriate to that user or hashes it out. So it's no longer John Smith. From a backup though, so that's great from a production. But let's say that we've just done that and then we go forward a day or an hour or 15 minutes and you have a database outage that requires a restore. What do you do then? Because if, for example, you're restoring that Oracle database back into production and John Smith's data is in that Oracle database, let's say that restore will work. We've got that down to a T, really good. But if that lands back in and John Smith's data in there, and then let's say at the same time there's a few different things happening and a mail shot goes out and John Smith receives that data, expect that the commissioner is going to jump on you and you're going to get a telling off, if not a hefty fine. So what this allows you to do is inject that delete process into the recovery. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that backup repository or take that backup file, we're going to mount that into that virtual lab. We're going to inject the script in while it's in that isolated environment to remove John Smith's data. And then we're going to continue that recovery process back into our hypervisor. The other not so marketing, especially if you're not in Europe or EMEA, talking about GDPR, is, okay, I want to give the developer, the SQL developer, I want to give them a copy of our front-end database that contains all of our accounting information. And I want them to make it quicker. I want them to do what developers do, make things quicker, make things faster. Apparently that's what they do. No, they're all good. But I don't want them to have names because my regulation, my SOX, my GDPR even, there's compliance around, they don't need access to that data. So I want to mask that data before it gets into their isolated environment. So let's do the same process in that we're going to mount it from the backup repository. We're going to inject that masking script to mask that database or some of the content of the database before then pushing that back into the hypervisor. And that doesn't need to be where it came from. This could be a dedicated test and dev environment that is used for exactly that developer, SQL developer, database developer type thing, to be able to understand what we'll use that data for performance, etc., without really having to violate any regulations on the data. So, and then in that similar vein is, and very topical, but this has been out, we've had this for a couple of years now, is something called Secure Restore. So again, if you get infected with ransomware, which is pretty inevitable at some point, without being the scaremonger around in here, but it's inevitable that we're all going to be infected by ransomware. It's how we can prevent the best we can. Absolutely, we always prevent ourselves from getting hurt or getting attacked, but we've always got to have that remediation plan. How do we get that data back? And that this puts a whole new light on the backup world around the ability to we always call backup an insurance policy because you only need it when you need it. But this is even more so because of how inevitable that ransomware attack is, or malicious insider threats as well. Like, it doesn't just need to be that. Is how can we ensure that the data that we're recovering is free of any malicious threats? So in the same vein, is we take that restore point that we want to restore. Let's say we've had ransomware or not, it doesn't really matter. But let's say we've had ransomware and maybe we've had it for a few months. Luckily, our antivirus software has picked it up. It's not encrypted. We've not had a huge outage like some in the news recently. And we're all good. We're back up and running. But then we have another outage of our SQL server, our file server. How do we know if we just go click, 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 restore from a restore that was just before the ransomware attack? How do we know for sure that that virus, that malicious threat is not in that backup? And prior to secure restore, we didn't know. You could kind of manually do this, but it was too much. It was very slow. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that restore point that we're restoring. We're going to mount that to our mount server, which is where our antivirus software is installed. We're going to trigger an antivirus check on that. And if no infections are found, perfect. We're going to continue the restore and it will be as quick as it was prior to that. If we find an infection, and this is part of the wizard-driven approach that we have, if it finds an infection, but you've got the bandwidth to be able to give it to your security team to go and investigate and understand what that is, because you need that restore point, because any later on the recovery point is going to start losing and impacting business, then fine, you can do that. And what we'll do is we'll continue the restore function, but we'll just put it into network safe mode. No network attached to it. So it'll be a virtual machine running, but no access to the internet or no access to the network at all. If you're a small shop, infection found, disregard, we'll go back again, or we'll wait for an antivirus definition before we get back up and running. It's not us doing that integration. We're not doing that. It's not us doing the antivirus scan. We integrate into Windows Defender. Why is that? Pretty handy, because that mount server has to be Windows, every Windows machine. So that could be a client operating system. Every Windows server has Windows Defender. But then we also, from a commercial concept, is we also integrate into ESET, Symantec Protection Engine, but really anything that has a command line support. I think, Jim, you've got something to say on this one as well.
Yeah, so one thing that's important to add to this is, for those of you that follow Gustav's weekly forums email, you know that every now and then he'll speak to the fact that in some situations, your backup repositories may not be secured the best way possible. And when that malware attack hits on-prem, that your backup repositories will be, and your Veeam server itself may be encrypted as well. It's worth noting that as a Cloud Connect provider, for those of you that are already ODS Cloud Connect backup customers or thinking about it, we have access to this same capability. And we also have vCloud Director-based infrastructure as a service facilities in place in our data centers, so that if you're infected on-prem, another option is we can take your Cloud Connect, your cloud copied backups, run the same process against it, and get you up and running in our data centers as well. So Michael, back to you.
Cool. So then the final one before I hand it over to Jim to talk about what these guys are doing at ODS in regards to leveraging data and giving you access to that to do more stuff, is the data integration API. So think about everything that we just said was very much, you have to spin up a virtual machine, you have to use the resources, you have to have a network, or you have to have the resources to be able to run those, and it's full virtual machine. We're going to spin up everything. What this allows us to do is just take the VMDKs or the virtual disks from the backups and expose those to a mount server or a third-party server. So think about some of the use cases on there. think about like a data classification engine, being able to understand what sort of data you're keeping. Essentially, if you're just keeping multiple copies of that data in different locations, different backup sets, this could potentially give you a lot more insight into what and where your data is residing. But then think about all the other stuff around vulnerabilities. One of the things, I was being a geek not so long ago around data forensics. So data forensics has a weird and wonderful workflow, and if anyone's in the chat, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Is that you have to kind of work, or you have to get yourself back to the start. It's exactly the same as any of those crime TV series that we watch on Netflix or any TV. Is that you kind of, as an investigator, you have to work backwards. You can only work with the facts that you have. So from a data classification, data forensics point of view, having access to this data in a read-only format, but being able to understand if there's any vulnerabilities within that data set is huge and massively important. Now, we could do that today we could do this pre-data integration API, but we'd have to spin up all of the virtual machines and have all of those resources. Luca did write that incredible script for 1,000 or it was a random subset of VMs, but ultimately, if you've got the resources, you could run 1,000. Not everyone has the resources to be able to do that. So what this allows you to do is actually take those backup disks and export them to the third party, the forensic, the data classification engine, whether it's understanding about vulnerabilities or actually threat analysis. But also think of, like, this is where there's some awesome stuff around, like, whether we want to call it business intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Another one of our Veeam Vanguards did an amazing job on being able to look at certain data points or data sets within their backup jobs, and there is so many more. Like, we've put 4 on this slide from a marketing point of view. There are so many other use cases, and they'll be very personal to each business or each vertical.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, that was a very brief overview of everything that we do at Veeam from a Veeam DataLabs point of view. But what I think is really interesting, and what I really want to hear and let Jim talk about, is, well, what about what offsite data sync can do in this space? And really, like, extend what you already do, Jim, as well, in that. So, okay, offering the backup as a service, DR as a service is one thing. Going back to the backup and recovery. But I think this is the important part, this is a differentiator, and I'll let you toot your own horn on you probably, I don't know if you saw the logo, but at the beginning, that innovation award that was handed out at Veeam this year, that's not given out lightly here. That is for true innovation when it comes to using Veeam technology to do good things. So with that, I'll let Jim speak.
Wow. And yeah, I'll try to toot lightly, if you will. So like I said, I love Data Labs. I love SureBackup, and we do a lot with that. But one of the things that Offsite Data Sync is known for in the VCSP space is that with most of our plans, it includes an annual DR test against your cloud backups. Today, that is done manually. So you would give us a call, say we want to do a DR test, you fill out a form on what virtual machines you want, and then we have someone on the back end effectively spin up the virtual machines you're requesting into a infrastructure as a service environment and give you VPN access in. Well, coming soon from Offsite Data Sync is we're going to have the auto recover feature. And all the things that we've talked about today with SureBackup and the capabilities to do that, it's great and it's wonderful, but you have to have the resources on-prem to be able to effectively duplicate large subsets of the virtual machines that you have running. Those have to run now twice in your compute environment to make that work. With auto recover, you're going to be able to go to our portal and select the virtual machines out of your backup jobs after you choose to enter your decryption key to decrypt your backups. and say, I want to spin up each of these virtual machines. And each of those virtual machines are now going to be put into a IaaS environment based on vCloud Director with an NSX Edge in front of it for VPN connectivity, and have that all done automatically. You choose what you want to spin up and for how long. And then on the back end, you can actually go in and say, okay, let's just destroy it all. Or optionally, we can actually make that permanent on site and it become, you know, us being your first step of a hybrid cloud migration or hybrid cloud setup. So if you've got a web application that you've decided is it's not, you don't have the tolerance for any downtime at all, and you want to get that out into a public cloud, you can actually restore it to our environment and then just leave it there, update a DNS entry and call it a day. Or we can couple that with our DR as a service, or what in Veeam parlance you might think of as Veeam replication. And so you've had to go in and do a restore through auto recover. We can then couple that on the back end with and change it into a replication job and actually let you fail that back to your on-prem when whatever event that you've had happen has been resolved. We are really excited about this capability, and we're looking forward to get this to you very soon. So the other part of it is we're really nailing down the complexity. Like I said, I love SureBackup. It is truly my first Veeam love. But the only knock that I've ever heard anybody say about it is the actual amount of effort that it takes and complexity to get off the ground with it can sometimes be a little overwhelming. Well, with auto recover, it's literally 3 steps. You would go to our portal, you would choose the backup job that you're looking for. I guess let's call it 3.5. If your backups are encrypted, which they should be, you will be prompted to enter your decryption key. You go and you choose the virtual machines you'd like to restore. And once the virtual data center is created and all of your virtual machines have been restored through instant recovery, you'll get an email that says, okay, here's the endpoint URL that you're going to go to for SSL VPN. Here's your username, here's your password, and you're up and you're running. You're doing everything, and that's all it takes. So, you know, like I said, let's talk about the complexity. Like I said, I love SureBackup. It's daunting. I've been to numerous Veeam ones, and I've been to quite a few Veeam events through my great honor of being named a Vanguard. That I get to talk to a lot of people that use Veeam a lot. And when you talk about SureBackup, it's like, well, I was never able to get the virtual lab set up correctly, or I was never able to get the application groups to work quite right and all that kind of stuff. Well, there's a lot to this. You have to get it all done. As I said, we are truly simplifying that capability. So if you don't believe me how quick this can be, we actually have a little recorded demo that we can show you here that I'll speak over. And it's literally 30 seconds. So like I said, you go, you choose your backup, your tenant. So you might have multiples of us. You find your backup job, tell me to see the VMs. You hit restore. And like I said, this is leveraging Veeam's instant recovery capability. So it's going to be relatively quick, and it's all automated on the back end. And then you end up getting an email with all your connectivity info, and you're done. That's it. It's so super simple. But yeah, look for this to come from us sometime between now and the next near future. And we will be happy to talk to you about it. But the beauty of it is we all talk about, so where am I right sizing this? So we have, ODS has backup as a service. We also have replication as a service. And I truly believe that you should be intermixing those. So your tier 1 applications go to replication. And that's great, and that's wonderful. But you don't want to do that with everything, because replication, sometimes is a little more costly. So we can now take your backups and let you have that middle ground to where you can leverage it for everything. So just to kind of wrap up for the day, because it looks like we're getting very close on time, let's talk about our key takeaways. So, we want to make sure that we are reducing our risk. So, you know, backups that you aren't verifying is just really expensive blobs of data. You know, you don't know what you're doing with it. You don't know that a backup is good until you test it. Veeam DataLabs and Auto Recover will let you test those backups and create sandboxes that you can then leverage to do things with it. And Michael talked about a lot of the great capabilities that we can do. And then, you know, let's point out, so DataLabs and Auto Recover is two ideas of the same thread. DataLabs is what you would use against your on-prem backups. It can be part of your regular DR practice. You know, let's say even, you know, for me, it was always monthly. With Auto Recover, we can do the same capabilities and more for cloud backups. So, you know, if you need to restore to do testing, you know, you want to do your annual DR testing with us, this is a way to do that. If you're having a malware situation and you need to get up and running quickly for your end users, you can use Auto Recover to actually restore into an IaaS environment with a little bit of help from our support people. And we can also use it as a migration, but it won't impact your production compute resources. It's really nice in that way. And with that, Michael, I truly do appreciate your time on this, and I'd like to say thank you. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Do you have anything to add, Michael?
Yeah, I'd just say, so from a Veeam content point of view, I did off the back of Veeam On last year, where we did a similar session with more demos. I wrote a white paper which walks through those steps that Jim talked about. So in fact, Jim talked about leveraging the cloud, leveraging ODS as a way of being able to spin up your environments and test that and use that workload where maybe you don't have the resource to enable you to do that on-prem. But then if you did have both as well, and you wanted a little bit of assistance in building that out, then one ODS I'm sure can assist there, but also these white papers that I built are around on veeam.com. If you look at the resources page, that they're all on there, as well as there's tons of video demos as well on how this works. But yeah, no, awesome stuff. If there's any questions, there's a Q&A or even in the chat. But yeah, if there's any questions, they're great. But I think we're just about at time. So
yeah. So again, thank you again, Michael. If you have any questions about this after the fact, you can feel free to reach out to me via email or Twitter. Or if you're looking to get started with this, you're more than welcome to email sales@offsitedatasync.com. With that, I'd like to say thank you, and we're going to go ahead and end the webinar. Bye, everybody.